Today we're going to discuss the theological significance of grape juice. Wait, what? Grape juice? Are you serious? Every toddler's favorite beverage is intimately tied to church history? Well, alright then, let's discuss the theological significance of grape juice. Welcome explorers, and in today's video we're going to explore the fascinating history of grape juice, specifically shelf-stable grape juice. Our story begins in the United States with the growth of the Temperance movement. The Temperance movement was a movement in the United States to fight for the responsible consumption of alcohol. Drunkenness was linked by temperance groups to all sorts of societal ills, very notably spousal abuse, and temperance groups worked tirelessly against drunkenness. And the temperance movement is as old, if not older, than the United States itself. But the temperance movement was kickstarted in the late 1700s by a pamphlet written by founding father Benjamin Rush entitled An Inquiry into the Effects of Ardent Spirits upon the Human Body and Mind. And Rush is a fascinating character. He was opposed to slavery and virtually all capital punishment in the 1700s, and was even critical of George Washington a time or two, but that's another video. And as the temperance movement grew, various temperance groups were started across the United States to actively work against alcohol abuse. And Rush's pamphlet is not against all consumption of alcohol. It has a section on what to drink instead of hard liquor, and Rush recommends several options such as water, coffee, sugar maple juice, molasses and water, and even vinegar and water. Vinegar and water. Tasty. He does recommend a little sweetener in the vinegar water, and I wonder how much sugar would it take to make vinegar and water taste good. But back to the point at hand. Two of the beverage options put forth by Rush is cider and wine, because the level of alcohol is smaller in those two beverages than hard liquor. So temperance is not the same thing as abstinence. But as with many movements, as the temperance movement grew, some wanted to fight for more, and some began to move beyond temperance and the responsible consumption of alcohol into total abstinence of alcohol. And the fight for the total abstinence from alcohol is called teetotalism. And if you are a follower of teetotalism, you are a teetotaler. Best guesses from historians as to where the term teetotal originated from is from the word total itself. And they are totally against the consumption of alcohol, but they wanted to emphasize their position, so they say the first letter of total for emphasis. T, totally against alcohol consumption. It's like I'm against alcohol with a capital T, totally. And the teetotal movement was led by various Methodist churches. There were other Christian denominations involved, but I think it's fair to say that the Methodists led the way. And being a teetotal Christian or a teetotal church congregation leads to a problem. There is a sacred meal instituted by Jesus himself that he commanded his followers to do in remembrance of him. And this sacred meal goes by a variety of names such as communion, the Eucharist, or the Lord's Supper. But this sacred meal involves unleavened bread and wine. And what is a teetotaler or a teetotaling congregation to do? Well, there are stories of teetotaling congregations that would take communion with grape juice rather than wine. And there are plenty of churches that observe the sacred meal with grape juice today, but this leads to another problem in the mid-1800s as the teetotalism movement grew. There was no such thing as shelf-stable grape juice back then. Ask any parents of a toddler that is climbing the walls, and they will tell you grape juice has a lot of sugar, and these sugars lead to grape juice spoiling or fermenting rather quickly. And in the early to mid 1800s, there were not bottles of grape juice on store shelves or in homes because they did not last. Grape juice was only available when grapes were in season and when grapes could be freshly squeezed for juice. Now, the problem becomes for these teetotaling congregations, what do congregations do without a fresh crop of grapes? What do they do when observing the sacred meal? What do all congregations do when grapes are not even in season? Great questions. Do they just become a hypocrite and say communion wine is okay? Or do they skip the sacred meal ritual altogether? And there are stories of teetotaling churches using water instead of wine for the sacred meal, using Jesus' miracle at the wedding of Cana where he turned water into wine as a biblical justification for this practice. And there are other stories of folks making some form of unfermented grape juice out of raisins, water, and egg whites to observe the sacred meal when grapes could not be freshly squeezed. Yum! But mostly teetotaling churches just did not observe the sacred meal without fresh grapes being available. And this brings us to Vineland Methodist Episcopal Church in Vineland, New Jersey. In the late 1860s, they named a dentist named Thomas as their communion steward. And Thomas took this ministry and his vow of teetotalism seriously. Thomas then attempted to solve the problem of the sacred meal observance when grapes could not be freshly squeezed. He set out to invent shelf-stable grape juice that could be widely available when grapes were not in season. And he succeeded in 1869. Thomas used a process of pasteurization that prevented the fermentation and spoilage of grape juice. He invented shelf-stable grape juice. But Thomas did not invent grape juice as a business venture, although it does become that. He invented grape juice so he and others could faithfully follow their sincere belief in teetotalism and their sincere faith in observing the sacred meal at church. Thomas invented grape juice for the Christian ritual of the sacred meal, communion. By the way, his last name is Welch, Thomas Welch. Yes, those Welches. Welch's grape juice, which was originally called Dr. Welch's unfermented wine, was invented to be used in the Christian ritual of communion. And now Thomas and his son Charles do begin a grape juice and grape jelly business venture that has thrived for well over a century. Welch's company was sold in 1956 and is owned to this day by a co-op of farm families. But I think this is an amazing story of ingenuity and a sincere desire to avoid hypocrisy. Thomas Welch, and even those that drank water or that crazy raisin and egg white mixture, understood that they would be hypocrite teetotalers if they drank fermented wine in communion. So they didn't. So I hope every time you wander the aisles of your local megamart and you see Welch's grape juice that you will be reminded that not every Christian is a hypocrite, and Welch's grape juice was invented specifically for the observance of the Christian sacred meal. Now I wonder what my dentist, Dr. Don, will think about a dentist inventing grape juice, since he has been telling my kids not too much juice for years. And as always, thanks for watching. And my bibliography is in the description below. Be blessed.